And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball news and discussion. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Podcast on the Brink is a joint production of the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. For complete coverage of IU basketball, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com. On this edition of Podcast on the Brink, Alex Bozich and I react to all of the news from yesterday, from Wednesday, as a lot happened. Juwan Morgan made his decision to return to Indiana. We discuss the impact of that, what it means for Romeo Langford, what it means for the entire roster. We discuss Archie Miller's comments from the Hoosiers Winery event, specifically those about Devonte Green, Deron Davis, and Zach McRoberts, which were particularly interesting. And then we look around the Big Ten. A lot of other stay-or-go decisions were made. What does that mean for the Big Ten race? What does it mean for Indiana? We talk a little bit of scheduling, too, on this potpourri edition of Podcast on the Brink. Here we go. Buying tickets can be complicated and confusing, but there is a better way to buy with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to every type of live event. Whether you're searching for a last-minute deal, planning a night out with friends, or need to find the perfect gift, SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There is nothing quite like being there in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone, have had it for a couple of years now, and it is by far the easiest way that I have found to shop for tickets because I can be anywhere, and with just a few taps, I can instantly find seats. I would love to use the SeatGeek app to pick up Mavericks playoff tickets this year and see Yogi, but obviously the Mavericks are not in the playoffs. But if you're in Indiana and you want to watch Victor, you want to watch Eric Gordon with Houston, or you want to watch OG with Toronto, or any other NBA playoff games, or any baseball games during the summer, SeatGeek is the way to go because SeatGeek is designed to make your ticket buying experience easier than ever. SeatGeek saves you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find amazing deals so that you don't have to go through all that legwork yourself. And best of all, listeners to Podcast on the Brink, like you, get $20 off of your first SeatGeek purchase. All you have to do is download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, today. That is promo code BRINK for $20 off of your first SeatGeek purchase. All right, we are back for another episode of Podcast on the Brink, talking IU basketball. I'm here with Alex Bozich. Alex, big day yesterday for IU basketball as you had the deadline for underclassmen who declared for the NBA draft to withdraw their names and say they were coming back from school. And you also had the Hoosiers Winery event, the annual event that everybody looks forward to with the basketball and football coach. So we want to talk about those two topics and, then maybe get into a little bit of discussion about how the Big Ten race shapes up with some of the guys who decide to come back. But let's start with the headline moment from this week, which is clearly Juwan Morgan's decision to come back to school. So, he has this breakout junior season. He declares for the NBA draft, gets a lot of feedback, takes a lot of time, to the point where I think everybody kind of assumed when he declared that he would be coming back. But then the more and more time it takes, you're like, well, are we sure he's coming back? Kind of like Robert Johnson last year, where it's like, all right, no one really expects him to get drafted, and yet he hasn't said he's coming back yet. He's coming back, right? And, Juwan put everybody's mind at ease by saying that he is coming back and, really seems like he's excited about embracing, his senior year and being a leader for Indiana while also working on some of the things that he got feedback from NBA teams that he needs to work on to make it to the NBA. So what are your initial thoughts, your initial reactions to Juwan's decision to return to Indiana?
I wasn't surprised that he ultimately decided to come back. Maybe a little bit surprised on how long it took, but also you have to remember that as recently as last weekend, I think he had a workout with a team. I think Atlanta was the last team he worked out. If I'm not mistaken, I think he worked out for a total of 3 teams. And so it wasn't like he had a rigorous workout schedule, but I think he did the smart thing by working out for several teams and gathering as much information as possible. I think it's really a great change to the system that we've had these last couple of years, where these guys can ultimately dip their toes in the water without risking their eligibility. And they're talking to NBA decision makers and not just relying on mock drafts, what ESPN.com is saying about where you might stand or what your college coach is saying. You're actually going to the decision makers and getting the best information possible. You learn kind of what they see in you, what they see as your strengths, and what they want to see in your next season in order to kind of make you more attractive in their eyes. And so, I think Juwan did the smart thing by declaring for the draft. I think some people obviously maybe got a little antsy, as you mentioned, towards the end, taking it up to maybe the day before the deadline. But you also have to remember, the rules are set up as they are so that, they have adequate time after the draft combine. Even though Juwan wasn't in the draft combine, he maximized the time that he had available to him and made the best decision for him. And I think Indiana fans should be excited that he's coming back. I think he's got a chance to have obviously a spectacular senior season. Him and Romeo Langford paired together with what else is going to be on the roster. I think, as I wrote the other day, I look at this Indiana team right now as a team that can contend in next year's Big Ten season. We'll probably get into that a little bit more later, but no clear-cut favorite in the league for me next season. And I think Juwan Morgan coming back with the other pieces in Bloomington, I think Indiana is going to have at least a dog in the fight next year in the conference race.
Yeah. No, it is unquestionably exciting from a fan perspective to be able to see Juwan play his senior year. I mean, it's so rare when we get really good players who, play through their senior year, because usually if a guy is really good, he ends up going pro. Obviously Yogi did that, came back. The comparisons that will be made between the season with DJ White and freshman phenom Eric Gordon and now Juwan Morgan and freshman phenom Romeo Langford are obvious and reasonable in a lot of ways, although there are, clear differences between how those players played. So let me play devil's advocate for just a second, Alex, and approach this topic from maybe the one angle where there could be trepidation. And that is, Juwan went and got all of this feedback. And a lot of the feedback, it seems like that he got is that, some of the things that he's going to have to do to get better, to be a better NBA prospect, play facing the basket. He's going to have to improve his shooting ability, going to have to be able to do some more versatile things than what he showed last year, where really he made a lot of his, scored a lot of his points, got a lot of his offensive production playing down low, kind of using his quickness and guile against guys that are bigger than him, stuff that isn't really going to work against the greater size and athleticism in the NBA. Do you worry at all about, Archie and the staff having to kind of shoehorn in Juwan's, the skill development is fine, but having to shoehorn in trying to showcase that stuff on the court? Because if you remember at the beginning of last season, Juwan really tried to step out and shoot and was taking a lot of outside shots and wasn't going inside as much, and he really struggled. And it's when he finally just, went inside, both, kind of out of necessity and I think just a recognition of how he would play better, that his game really started to take off. And without Deron Davis healthy and without another, clear-cut option, to play down low, even though there's more talent and more bodies there, it still seems like he's going to have to get a lot of work done down there, but that's not necessarily what he wants to showcase for the NBA. So do you worry at all about trying to fit all of that in and kind of serve both masters in a sense, where you're trying to showcase Juwan's improvement for the NBA, but also, do what's best in terms of him producing for the team right now to get wins?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think a fair question to ask. I think you can do both. And what I mean by that is I think Juwan is an unselfish enough player to where he's going to do what's best for the team. But at the same time, as a coaching staff, if you feel confident in his ability to step out, maybe give him a little bit more freedom to do that. Maybe encourage him to do that. Now, if something's not working, obviously, everything has to stay within the confines of the team. That goes for, the best player on the team all the way to the last player on the team. But I think Juwan showed early in his career that he was capable of spacing the floor. His freshman year, he did a pretty good job in hitting some timely threes and showed that off as a strength. I think, the main thing that's going to help him this year, maybe excel more in that area in terms of a floor spacer and being able to face up, is he's going to have better players around him. And so he's going to take a little bit of pressure off himself to try, to be doing so many things. And maybe he's less fatigued at certain times, and maybe that helps him shoot better from the perimeter. Maybe that helps him shoot better from the free throw line. I don't think it was necessarily from a lack of ability. I think he was just there was a lot on him last year. He did start out slow, as you mentioned, but I think he's going to have a little bit less of a load on him in terms of pressure. And I think that should help him just kind of, let things come to him a little bit more, not have to force the issue as much. And I think ultimately it should make him a more well-rounded all-around player, because as you mentioned last year, Indiana didn't have any perimeter shooting. And so basically their best weapon was, forcing the ball inside to Juwan and letting him go to work. And with better talent around him, other guys surrounding him, I think that he's going to be able to show off a more well-rounded game. Obviously, he's got to put in the work this offseason to make himself more consistent in that area. But I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be able to do both. And I think he's also self-aware enough to realize, if this is not working at certain times, and he needs to go back to what kind of got him to this point to even have his name mentioned and as a potential NBA player. It was just his ability last year to operate around the basket. So it'll be interesting, I think, to watch. It's going to be really, to me, in a lot of ways, fascinating to see how he and Romeo Langford kind of split up the load in terms of shots, and who's kind of, I don't want to say alpha dog, but who's the go-to option in the late closing minutes. I think both of them are going to complement each other very well, and I think both of them are unselfish. Where if one of them has a better matchup, they're going to go exploit that one. So overall, I think I think both things can happen. I think Juwan can show himself to be a more versatile player while also staying within the confines of the team.
Yeah, I agree with you. Again, I kind of look at that as maybe the one possible, area where this isn't a great thing, but in every other sense, I mean, this is fantastic, just from a program standpoint, from a basketball standpoint. And I really think the other impact that it has is, you've got your guy, you've got your senior leader. He's going to be a preseason first team all Big Ten candidate. He's, one of the odds on favorites to be Big Ten player of the year, along with guys like Carson Edwards and Ethan Happ. So he is that guy who's been there. He's done that. He doesn't mind shouldering leadership. In fact, he embraces that. How much do you think that will help Romeo's transition to Indiana? Because I feel like if you take Juwan off, you've got Zach McRoberts, who's been around and can be a leader, obviously, by example. And you've got, some of the older guys like a Devonte Green that's going to be stepping into that role. But without Juwan, it really feels like you would have had a big void in terms of production and in leadership. And, Romeo is going to step in, being the guy everybody's looking to, certainly for production. I just wonder if that would be too much pressure for him, and if having Juwan is going to help him just ease in a little bit. And there's already going to be a lot of pressure on Romeo, don't get me wrong, but having Juwan there, it just seems like it's going to make his transition more comfortable and allow him a little bit of time and space to focus on getting comfortable without having just the heaping mounds of pressure he would have if Juwan were not here.
Yeah, I think not just with Romeo specifically, but I think with the whole roster, it helps to not only have Evan Fitzner, who's been kind of through some of the high level games of the NCAA tournament, but Juwan's really the only guy, if I'm not mistaken, that'll be on next season's roster that's really had experience winning, a conference championship. The only guy that's had experience playing in, the bright lights of a big time NCAA tournament game. He was there for Indiana's game when they beat Kentucky a couple of years ago in the tournament. He was there for that North Carolina game in the Sweet 16. He's played in a lot of high pressure, high level games. And, he's going to be a guy that others look to for leadership on the court, along with Evan Fitzner. I think both of those guys are going to kind of be, in terms of speaking from experience, we've been here before, kind of the guys that others look to on the roster. And as many of those guys as you can have, you want to have as much talent as possible. And I think the talent influx with the incoming players is obviously one of the key storylines and key things to improvement next season. But you also have to have some experience. We've seen with some of these teams that have great players coming in every year, a Kentucky, a Duke, sometimes they end up in the Final Four and sometimes they don't. And more often than not, the reason that they don't is because they don't have that senior upperclassman leader that they can look to in key situations. And I think we could see our next March when it comes to maybe a round of 32 NCAA tournament game and game on the line, to have guys like Evan Fitzner and Juwan Morgan on the floor could pay huge dividends, because there's no good substitution for experience, and both of those guys are going to bring it at a high level.
As you look forward to doing your top 25 players in the Big Ten this offseason, do you foresee any way that Indiana doesn't have 2 of the top 10? And is there a chance they could have 2 of the top 5?
Wow, I definitely think both guys will be in the top 10. Top 5.
I mean, Juwan's top 5, right? That's unquestioned. Yes?
Well, I would say for sure Carson Edwards is in the top 5. Ethan Happ's in the top 5. I'm trying to think who else is in the league. So
I think
Charles
Juwan's
Matthews.
Yeah,
Charles Matthews is probably going to have an argument just based on what he did in the tournament last year and what he's going to do for Michigan next season. James Palmer Jr. from Nebraska is going to be another guy who's going to get a lot of preseason buzz. I think he was an all Big Ten player last year. I think Juwan will be in the top 5. I don't know if Romeo and him will both be there. It's going to be maybe a debate on which guy you think is going to have a bigger role next season. But I definitely think that both will be in the top 10.
Yeah.
Maybe a more interesting question is, will they have a third guy somewhere later in the top 25? Because if they do, then really it might be time to look out.
I mean, I guess the only other guy would be Justin Smith, and that's you're really basing that on potential rather than what he's already done. So,
or our breakout candidate, Devonte Green.
Green. So, okay, I want to talk about Devonte Green because I thought Archie had some interesting comments at the Hoosiers Winery event about him. Before we do that, let's take a quick break for a couple of ads, pay some bills, and then we'll come back and let's talk about Hoosiers and Devonte specifically. All right, Alex. So you were at the Hoosiers Winery event. Posted the video of Archie's comments. Interesting stuff. Obviously, we haven't had a chance to hear Archie talk a lot recently, so it's always nice to hear him answer some questions and give some insight on things that are going on with the program. There wasn't really anything earth-shattering, but I did think he had some interesting comments on a couple of guys that stood out to me anyway, and I want to hear who stood out to you. But I thought his comments on Zach McRoberts and Devonte Green were particularly interesting. And let's start with Devonte, because it sounds like, and tell me if you got this impression, but it sounds like at some point this offseason, he and Devonte kind of had a conversation, a little sit-down conversation about how good do you want to be? And it is never... It has always been clear that Archie Miller believes in Devonte Green's ability. He believes in the talent. He believes there is a high-level player there. And he even mentioned that, Devonte showed at times last year he can be one of the best guards in the conference. And he did. I mean, there were stretches, that stretch in February where he really did show that, but it's surrounded by inconsistency. And it sounds like they had that conversation, and from what Archie said, that Devonte responded really well to it and had as good a spring as anybody in the program. Said he was shooting the ball as well as anybody that he's seen in his time at IU since the few weeks that he worked with James Blackman Jr. before he went pro. And that's, granted, the shooting hasn't been great in the program, but, just to be mentioned in that same sentence with James Blackman Jr. shows the type of shooting that he was doing. So I think if you look at what Archie said, there are some reasons, I think, to continue to be optimistic about Devonte Green and his development, and that maybe the light bulb is going on and the maturity and the focus will combine with the talent to be a guy who, as an upperclassman, can really put some of those inconsistencies and struggles behind him and be a player Indiana can count on. Did you get any of that from what Archie said about Devonte, or am I reading too much into it?
Yeah, I agree with most everything you said there. I thought it was, Archie didn't give, a ton of, I guess what you would call maybe juicy nuggets on what to expect from last season, but you kind of read between the lines on what he said about Devonte. And I think you hit the nail right on the head in that, he thinks that he can be a really good player, but at the same time, your talent's only going to take you so far, right? Do you want to be, just a guy on the team, or do you want to be one of the guys, right? There's a difference. And I think he sees something in Devonte Green that could be special, but at the same time, he wants him, a coach can only push you so far. A coach can only have the same conversation with you. Last year it was, he had that stretch where he barely played against Purdue, and then he comes back late in the season and he kind of takes off. And, that was probably his best stretch of play of the year, but you got to have that consistently if you want to be, a constant in the rotation, a guy that the team is relying on a night in and night out basis. And so I think last night what he kind of told us was, hey, we've had conversations, and I don't know this for a fact, but, just based on kind of the way he said things, maybe it wasn't the most comfortable thing in terms of the conversation of, hey, do you want to be one of the guys that carries this team, or do you just want to be another guy on the roster? And it sounds like Devonte's responded in terms of the way he bounced back from that conversation. It seems like he's taking things a lot more seriously. And I'm really interested to see. I think, Jerod, we might have been onto something a couple weeks ago when we talked about the breakout season for Devonte Green, just based on his talent alone. And if he's totally 100% bought into being the player that Archie Miller thinks he can be and wants him to be, I think he could be a very big surprise next season. So that was one of the more encouraging things I took from last night, was just that the fact that he was willing to share with us that that maybe they've had conversations this offseason that kind of laid out the expectation, and that Devonte's responded accordingly from that.
Yeah, and the other guy, and he had some interesting comments about Deron Davis too, and we should talk about those. But I wanted to mention Zach McRoberts real quick, because just in case anybody thinks that with this influx of talent and young talent, obviously, that Indiana has coming in, that maybe Zach McRoberts would get lost in the shuffle. Archie, not that he was trying to, but he can't disguise his affection for Zach McRoberts. I think he even might have said that he's one of his favorite players to coach, and said, hey, if I'd started playing him earlier last year, maybe we win a few more games. So that's one of those things where, to me, as you start projecting forward with lineups and you start, mixing and matching and seeing what's going to be there, it's really easy when you kind of pencil Zach McRoberts' name in there to say, okay, well, you take McRoberts out, and maybe, you put Jerome Hunter in, you do this, that, or the other. Man, I think it's going to be hard for people to unseat him, because he does so many of the things defensively that Archie wants. Archie mentioned last night that he's really hoping to see him be a more confident offensive player, shoot it with more confidence. And so, I really took that Archie, and Zach has certainly earned this. He certainly earned it with his play last year, but Archie views him as an integral part of this year's roster. And to me, a guy that, until proven otherwise, I expect to see him, firmly in the rotation, if not as a starter, especially early in the season.
Yeah. I looked at it, I agree with everything you said in terms of McRoberts. The interesting thing to me is, while he talked kind of about Zach's importance, when you listen to him talk about all the new incoming players, like, he didn't separate any of them in terms of their potential impact on the team next year. He almost talked about them as they're all equals, and they're all coming in as kind of at the same level in terms of, they have to earn their spot. And I think that's important to have in a program. You don't want guys coming in who are expecting anything in terms of playing time or shots. And I think he makes some great points about Zach McRoberts in terms of what he can do from a defensive perspective, what he needs to improve offensively. And so I think all those guys, I agree with you. They're going to have to come in and maybe show that they're capable of providing more production. I think that's when you look at this roster next season. I was kind of just glancing at it the other day, and I looked at it and I'm like, wow, there's 12 or 13 guys here who I think could play, right? I mean,
yeah,
potentially. And last year it wasn't like that. And so Zach McRoberts is definitely right in the mix on that list. And it's going to be, last year it was searching for options, which guy can we put in and maybe find something. And there was kind of different stages of guys who played, late in the season. Freddie McSwain was one of the guys that he kind of found and said, hey, we got to go with this guy. He gives us a chance. Next year it's going to be, there's so many guys on the roster who are going to have a chance to make contributions. And I think that's going to make everyone better. There might be some guys, obviously, that don't get minutes at certain times. They're not going to be happy, but that should motivate them if they're competitors and guys that want to get better to up their level of play. And I think Zach McRoberts has set a pretty high bar in Archie's mind. And, if you're Jerome Hunter, you're Demezy Anderson, you're coming in, you want minutes. Hey, you better show me something that helps differentiate from you from Zach McRoberts, or what he provides to us right now from a defensive perspective is going to be hard to take minutes from him.
Yeah. Obviously, he talked about Romeo, and you're right. I thought he did do a good job of, kind of just talking about all the freshmen the same way. He did mention with Robert Finnessy that he does expect him to contribute as a freshman, but, couch that with, just because of, because of need, because we only have 4 guards. So he did make that mention about Robert Finnessy. The other guy was Deron Davis, and nothing in Archie's comments last night led me to feel any more bullish about Deron's availability, especially early in the season, than I was already. And I wasn't really feeling very good about it. Whenever you hear, the surgeries are successful, the timeline is progressing, all of this stuff, like that's all good. And you expect to hear that. But I think with Deron, you have to step back and remember that it's an Achilles injury, which is a tough injury to come back from, number one. And Archie even mentioned last night, something that we've mentioned a couple of times, that it's especially difficult for a guy at Deron's size and a guy who can put on weight easily when he's not able to be active. And Archie mentioned that at least once. He might have mentioned it both in the media availability and in the talk that he gave. So to me, I'm approaching that with just waiting and seeing, and anything that we get from Deron before maybe January 1st, I'll look at as a bonus and just hope that he's ready to contribute by the second half of the season. So I think that's something to take into account as you start looking at lineups and looking for how you project forward. It's hard to be more optimistic, I think, about Deron being really ready to contribute before then.
Yeah, the interesting thing there is, even in my opinion, if Deron was healthy going into next season, say he had played all of last year, I didn't see anything in his play last year that suggested that he would have just a clear-cut advantage over some of these incoming guys in terms of minutes. He did some good things, but at the same time, he showed some deficiencies that aren't necessarily conducive, to playing in the pack line defense. And so I think he's going to have an uphill battle to even get to 15, 20 minutes a game next season, just based on the fact that they're bringing in Evan Fitzner, a guy whose experience can space the floor. The fact that they're bringing in Jake Forrester, Race Thompson. We'll see how Clifton Moore progresses. And it kind of reminds me a little bit, I think I said this a couple weeks ago, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Deron's freshman season, right? When he didn't get on campus because of the academics and he was behind all season. It would be unfortunate if this injury kind of takes him on that same path. But, if he can't do all the things that everyone else is doing all summer, and, if he's not, 100% right at the beginning of the season, he's going to be a guy that's going to have to scratch and claw his way back into, a starting role. And I don't think that's a given. I think he can still be a guy, regardless of if he's starting or coming off the bench, that can give you something in terms of being a back to the basket presence, a guy who can help protect the rim. But, last year, I think I threw him in the end of the top 25 list of the Big Ten players. And now I think a year later, it's looking like a long shot that he's going to be anywhere close to that type of player. So he's really an intriguing guy in terms of tracking his offseason progress and how he progresses. And I'm still a pretty big believer in his talent. I think he's, a guy that can help you. I just don't know that he's ever really going to fulfill the potential in terms of maybe what people thought when he was originally recruited. And, obviously that's of no fault of his because of the injury, but, the talent level is going to be getting significantly better around him. And so it's going to be tougher for him to kind of maintain his standing in terms of the rotation.
The other topic that I thought was interesting from the Hubers comments, and I think you asked Archie about this during the media availability, was about the scheduling. And it sounds like they're kind of in a holding pattern, waiting to figure out, the dates and the times for, the ACC Big Ten Challenge and just some of those things so that they can schedule in around it. Obviously, you've got the 20-game Big Ten schedule, which Archie mentioned a couple of times. But he did say, he was very firm in saying that this is going to be a more challenging schedule this year. And I know, listening to Fred's comments, he kind of alluded to the advanced level schedule calculus that Archie and Bill Komar have devised, to kind of figure out the best way to schedule. And, he talked about how they're, as good as it gets in the country, to figuring out the kind of schedule that you need, to put yourself in the best position for the NCAA tournament, something that he learned at Dayton. And that was probably more of a necessity there than it will be at Indiana, but still it never hurts you. And I don't remember if Archie was talking about this last night or in other comments, so basically talking about how, as a whole, the conference had to get better at that, because last year, you have teams that are winning 13 games, not making the NCAA tournament because there just wasn't any heft to the non-conference schedule. So it sounds like that's something that, not just he is committed to and that Indiana is committed to, but that the whole conference, maybe they even had discussions about it, because, they've got to fix that if the conference is going to have more respect so that teams in the middle of the pack can get into the NCAA tournament. So I thought those, obviously we would have loved to hear something about Indiana, Kentucky, or, some other big name matchup. But I was encouraged by what I heard about the schedule simply because, it sounds like they're going through a very methodical process. They're having to wait on a few dominoes to fall. But it continues to sound like Archie is very committed to the non-conference schedule being very strategically planned and more difficult, which is good.
Yeah, I think the thing we learned last year is you can't rely on the Big Ten in its current state right now, winning a lot of games there to make the tournament. We learned that with Nebraska. And I think overall, the league next year is, you have to, when you build your schedule, you're looking at the fact, all right, we're playing 20 Big Ten games, but how many games are we going to play against teams that, we think are potential tournament teams or teams that are really going to help our numbers? And, I don't know. I mean, we've seen early projections of, 3 teams in the Big Ten being in the top 25 preseason. So you look at that and you say, well, I don't want to beat Nebraska next year. I don't want to go 13-7 and not make the tournament. So instead of, we know there's a pretty solid base of non-conference games. There's ACC Big Ten Challenge. There's the Gavitt games. There's the Louisville game next season. And there's Butler. And then say there's 6 or 7 other games. You want to have some, top 200, top 150 games in there, at least a couple or more to just have something that counts rather than scheduling wins. And so, that's the interesting thing when the schedule comes out. We're all going to be looking to see, well, how many Ken Pom top 150 teams or top 100 teams? And I think there's going to be more than last year. He basically said as much, that the schedule is going to be tougher than it was last year. And I think a lot of that's based on what we saw, as you mentioned, last year with a couple teams, Nebraska, Penn State, who didn't do enough in the non-conference and then tried to rely on Big Ten wins. And, well, the Big Ten wasn't very good. So I don't think until the conference proves itself capable of, sending more than, 5 or 6 teams to the tournament, that you can just rely on the conference schedule anymore to get yourself there. So you have to do some work in the non-conference. And I think they realize that. And I'm looking forward to having some earlier season games once again that mean a little bit more. It gets, it's fine to have 2 or 3 maybe that are kind of gimmies, but beyond that, you really shouldn't be playing any bottom feeders, because what do you really get out of it?
Yeah, I mean, nothing outside of maybe some experience for young guys and some confidence building, but not a whole lot. So other than the things that we have talked about, was there anything else that stood out to you at Huber's? Maybe outside of the stuff people can see on the videos, like the comments from Archie, was there anything about the atmosphere or, just, the people who were there that kind of stood out to you that might have been different about this year's event than other ones that you've gone to?
Well, last year was different from the previous year, just the level of enthusiasm and the amount of people that showed up. And this year was at another level. I mean, I got there a half hour, I think, before the doors even opened. And it wasn't obviously a cool day. I mean, it's hot down here in southern Indiana area. And there's a line half across the parking lot of people waiting to get in. And I think they turned away 300 people who wanted to come in, in the previous weeks in terms of trying to contact and get tickets. I think that was the largest crowd they've ever had in that room, Plantation Hall, I think it's called, at Huber's Winery. And overall, I just think it speaks to the enthusiasm right now around the program. Obviously, Romeo's a big part of it, but the recruiting class in general, the excitement of what the future holds for the program. And it was a great turnout. And I think it speaks a lot to this, some of these on the road events have kind of come and gone over the years. This one's just always stuck around. It's like something you have on the calendar every year. And I don't know the particular reason why they always come back here, but I think a lot of it has to do with there's at least, even in the down years, there was 500 people showing up. And I think this year it was 980 or something like that, close to 1,000 people that showed up. And I think it was an interesting, fun night, good food. A lot of people just kind of beginning their summers, but in the back of their mind, you're always thinking about the fall, IU football starting and IU basketball. And I think overall last night was a good representation of just the general excitement around not only IU basketball, IU football, and athletics in general.
Well, number one, it's in southern Indiana, which Archie let slip as his favorite region of Indiana, which I thought was a funny comment.
Yeah, that was funny.
And wine, Alex. There's wine. People love wine.
That's true. That's true.
All right, so let's wrap up here. Let's kind of take a little bit of a broader view of the Big Ten, because now we have a lot of the stay or go decisions are in. Ethan Happ is going back to Wisconsin. Carson Edwards and Ogel Eastern are going back to Purdue. Charles Matthews is going back to Michigan. James Palmer is going back to Nebraska. There might be a few that I'm forgetting there. Now that has shaken out, you mentioned earlier that Indiana is a team that can compete in the Big Ten. I absolutely believe that is true. That doesn't mean that, that they have to win the Big Ten for it to be a successful season. And we know that scheduling and timing and injuries and the development of young guys and all those things play into it. But I don't think there's any reason to think Indiana can't be right in the mix, and be a top 4 or 5 team in the Big Ten with a chance to win it, given, when you just kind of look up and down the rosters in the Big Ten. So, I'm assuming that you agree with that. And if so, who do you view as the biggest competition for Indiana? And then also maybe the biggest surprise team in the Big Ten, based on the rosters as they're looking right now?
Yeah, well, I would say Michigan State obviously have to be in the discussion just based on the fact that Michigan has been pretty consistently good under John Beilein, despite what they're losing from last year's team. Getting Charles Matthews back is going to be a big deal for them. I think they're going to have obviously a younger team next year, but a talented team. Michigan State's interesting to me. A lot of people are putting them in the preseason top 10, top 15. I mean, they lost 2 lottery picks probably, and Tum Tum Nairn and Gavin Schilling and Ben Carter. That's a lot of pieces to lose, but they also do have Nick Ward back, Josh Langford, Cassius Winston. I think that's a good core, although I'm not as high on them maybe as some others. I think Nebraska's a team that it's going to have a say, although I just wonder with them, they don't have a superstar type talent. James Palmer Jr. is a good college player. I just wonder maybe have they kind of hit their ceiling of what they're going to be. They're a team to watch, I think. Ohio State obviously will take a step back. The one team that I'm looking at, Maryland, is obviously going to be interesting. Losing Kevin Huerter is going to be a big deal, but having Bruno Fernando back, having Anthony Cowan, I think they're going to have a lot of talent, and they added McDonald's All-American and Jalen Smith, so they'll be interesting to watch. But the team that was really surprising, NBC Sports did that kind of Big Ten reset, and they had Wisconsin 8th in the Big Ten, and I know last year was kind of wasn't last year the year the streak ended for the top 4 for Wisconsin?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. But I look at them, and okay, Ethan Happ's back, so he's going to give them high level production. He's just, it seems like he's been there now for 15 years, but he's
traveled a lot of miles for Wisconsin.
Yeah, he's one of the best players in the Big Ten, if not one of the best players in the country. And I think a thing that people are forgetting about them is they had a lot of injuries last year, and I think their system, while I don't think Greg Gard is Bo Ryan, I think he's still a pretty solid coach. And I'll be shocked if Wisconsin's not somewhere in the top 5 or 6 in the Big Ten. So they're another team that I'm looking at as a potential contender for the Big Ten. But overall, it's wide open. It's not. There's no clear cut team. Purdue I think can be good again with Carson Edwards, Matt Harms, Ryan Klein, Nojel Eastern. I think they're going to take a step back, though. They're going to take a step back, but I still think they're going to be a good team. I don't think they're a team that can win the Big Ten, but I think they're a potential, top half of the Big Ten team. It's just I just don't see much separation between, the teams that people are putting in these preseason top 25s and an Indiana or a Purdue or a Maryland, these other teams. It's really going to be interesting to see when these preseason magazines start coming out in the fall, just to see how. I think a lot of them are going to be all over the board because there's just no consensus or no real feeling on where these teams are all going to fit in. I think at some point here in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to do like an off-season power rankings, and I'm sure I'll get a ton of comments on that. Like, how'd you come up with this or how'd you come up with that?
Yeah, good luck with that.
It's really hard to project going into next season.
Yeah. Yeah. And it'll be interesting. I mean, look back to last year and, who were kind of the preseason darlings. Obviously, Michigan State was, and people knew that Purdue was going to be good. But then everybody was high on Minnesota and Northwestern. And, I mean, the bottoms kind of fell out of both of their seasons, and you can look at it in hindsight and say, well, maybe Northwestern was a little bit overrated because people were projecting that this core was going to get better, and maybe that core was just what it was. And Minnesota, obviously they continue just to have all kinds of disarray in their program and injuries as well. So will there be those teams this year that kind of start to get a lot of chatter and a lot of off-season momentum? But, then it kind of doesn't hold up once the season comes, and then who will be some of those teams? Like in Indiana was to a certain extent last year, finishing higher than people thought. And obviously a team like Nebraska that was able to do that. Who will be those teams that will jump up? It seems like there's a lot of potential for that this year, given what you said, that there's just not a whole lot of separation. And I mean, look, that's why when I look at this, again, I mean, there is no reason to think that Indiana can't be among that top handful of teams that's fighting it out because, they have, I mean, if not the best two-man combination in the conference, it's one of the top 2 or 3. And then, really throw someone else in there, add Justin Smith to it. If you think Devonte Green's going to get better, throw him on there. Now you start looking at the best 3-man combination. They've got one of those too. So, the roster's better. The balance is better. And obviously just having another season in Archie Miller's system to be more comfortable. Hopefully the growing pains won't be quite as acute as they were last year. So lots of reason to be optimistic about where Indiana can be in the Big Ten. Lots of reasons, I think, to be optimistic about a fun Big Ten season. But I will say, just as a fan of IU and someone who believes Indiana is getting back on the right track and can be a consistent contender in the conference and a team that's going to start competing for top 4 and 5 seeds in the NCAA tournament, I would like to see the conference get back to being better and maybe having a little bit of separation and getting a little bit more of the top talent, because you start looking at some of these rosters and it's, you think back to how good the conference was like in 2013 and other times, and it's still pretty underwhelming. Just looking up and down at the level of teams. I mean, 2 or 3 teams in the top 25, I think the Big Ten's got to figure out ways to get better and improve that and get the conference back on more solid footing than it is right now. On it from a national perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, we've had conversations about the overall talent level in the Big Ten before, and I think it's gone down. I think one of the things that can really help the Big Ten moving forward is getting Indiana and Ohio State back to being good on a every year basis. I mean, Michigan's held up their end of the bargain. Michigan State, for the most part, has. Wisconsin was, model of consistency for a long time. And I still think they're going to be a pretty good team under Greg Gard. But really the thing that's holding the Big Ten back was kind of Indiana and Ohio State dropping off these last couple of years. If they can get back to being perennial top 25 teams, then you have a kind of a top tier of the league. And I've always said that, everyone wants to talk about, well, when's Indiana get it back to the Final Four? When are they going to get back to the Elite Eight? When are they going to go back to the championship game? Well, Indiana needs to first consistently finish in the top 3 or 4 of the Big Ten every year, right? I mean, that's how you kind of build some consistency. They won 2 Big Ten titles under Tom Crean, but they never kind of pieced together every year over year that they were a top Big Ten team. And we'll see if Archie Miller can do that, but I think that's really the first step in reestablishing Indiana as kind of a national power again. And also, as I said, for the Big Ten needs Indiana and Ohio State, I think, to be good consistently to get back to being kind of mentioned in the same breath as a Big 12 or an ACC at this point in time, or even the Big East, really, for that matter. I mean, the Big East has been just as good, if not better, than the Big Ten in recent years. And obviously they have Villanova, who's right now maybe the premier program in college basketball. If you look at what they've done the last 3 years. So interesting.
Any final thoughts, Alex? I believe schedule-wise, we are taking next week off, correct? And then we'll be back.
We'll be back
after that.
Yep. Taking some time away, but
are we expecting any news in the next couple of weeks? I mean, when are we going to hear about say the ACC Big Ten Challenge opponent and times, that kind of thing?
It sounded like last night, based on what Archie Miller said, they're expected to find out really soon. So I assume once the schools find out, we're going to know shortly after. So could be sounds like as early as this week, maybe today or next week when we know that. And I'm sure after that, some of the other scheduling pieces will start to fall into place. I think like 6 teams have already released their non-conference schedule from around the country. And so the schedules, I think, are going to start coming now from all around the country, and we'll start to fill in some of the pieces that are left remaining. I think we'll have the Big Ten schedule probably later in the summer. Obviously, the returning players coming back on campus this weekend. Freshmen report June 12th. The Indiana All-Star games are next week. So a lot going on, and never too far away from July recruiting either. So before you know it, we'll be into the fall. Official visits will start to happen. I'm sure some recruiting news will start to happen again. And so, like I said, there's never a dull moment with Indiana basketball. I think it's a great thing. You can follow it year round now, and we'll be here to discuss it and talk about it every week here on the podcast. So obviously taking next week off, but it's always fun to chat. And as we've said before, if you have ideas for topics in the off season that you'd like us to cover, or specific guests that you'd like us to try to book for the show, you can send Jerod or I a tweet or an email, and we'll do our best to accommodate those.
By the way, breaking news, friend of the show, Gary Parrish, just released his top 25 and 1, and he has Indiana at number 25 based on Juwan Morgan coming back. Seems to be, kind of seems to be where Indiana's fitting in some of these that you're seeing, somewhere between 24, 25, 26, 27, somewhere around there. So that's good to see. And last thing before we get out of here, your NBA Finals prediction, Cavs in 6 or Cavs in 7?
Warriors in 5.
I know that. I mean, that is the most likely scenario, but
yeah, it's 4 straight years of this. Obviously I'm going to be on vacation next week, so I don't even know how much I'll get to watch, or how much I even care to watch. Just because I think we all know what's going to happen, unfortunately. But I think at least I was right on the Cavs getting back to the finals. Never bet against LeBron until he plays the Warriors, and the Warriors are just too much of a well-oiled machine at this point to overcome.
Yeah. This is a big risk-reward series. Like, there's a risk that this is a very boring, kind of non-eventful series, but the reward, the possibility for drama, if the Cavs can keep this close and take it to 6 or 7 games, and LeBron just puts on a signature performance, is huge because of how resigned everybody is to the Warriors just winning in 4 or 5. So there's some potential there if they can make it a series, but the likelihood is that it's just kind of a drubbing by the Warriors. I'm hoping for more, but we'll see.
Yep.
All right. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And we will talk to you in 2 weeks on a brand new edition of Podcast on the Brink. Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. To get more from me and from Alex, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana University basketball. If you liked this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member who loves IU basketball as much as you do. You can also support the show by leaving a rating and review on iTunes, which helps us get the word out to more IU fans like yourself. We will be back next week with a new episode. Until then, as always, go Hoosiers.